Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am long back from my hiatus, back to making epic content for you gentlemen to find, gentlemen to enjoy. Today I am enjoyed by a wonderful guest, Mr. Dimes from the Blood Satellite podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me. I was just writing a message to my channel about because I realized I didn't tell anyone I was even going live here. But yes, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
No, it was my pleasure. I recently kind of found out you guys. I saw your appearance on the Jay Burden show, a kind of sister channel in this kind of ecosystem. And I really enjoyed your episode you did with him, talking about kind of left wing literature and some of the ideas we can glean from that without all the cringe baggage, kind of dragging it down, and kind of this like right wing hesitancy to even like read left wing literature at all to glean any valuable information from it.
Yeah. Also, just to understand things you might otherwise disagree with, and I think you and I are in a very interesting political space right now, where there's a lot of guys in our scene who are ostensibly right wing, but they'd be interested in at least understanding the arguments made by even an anarchist or like an old school Bolshevik. Like you can read this stuff, and in the case of Mikhail Foucault, who we were covering there, it's like like you couldn't pick a worse type of guy. He was as gay as a man could be. There was no one gayer than Foucault, and gay in all kinds of weird directions with like horses and shit. But he had some interesting ideas, and what I find fascinating is people who have the mental fortitude to kind of parse through. That sounded like a pretentious attaboy to myself. It's not, but there's a lot of people who could like kind of parse through these really dense, crazy ideas and find something in there that can inspire, some other thought. Anyway, that's a long way of saying you can read Foucault and end up not gay.
Yeah, it's this kind of latent right wing hesitancy to read anything from the enemy, which I get totally fine. We know their ideas are very corrosive to society, but at the same time, we should kind of be past this like fear of like reading the enemy's literature to see if we can glean anything valuable from it. And we could disregard most of it out of the way, but again, there's still like 10 or like 5% of it's actually valid. Otherwise, they wouldn't be winning like they are right now. So maybe there's something to be gleaned from their strategies and ideas.
Yeah, there's actually just as an example, I'm reading this book right now by Jürgen Habermas called "The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere." And it's about bourgeois society. It's overwhelmingly Marxist influenced, but and he might have a materialistic dialectical view of history that I might not completely agree with, but he's at least looking at something that's kind of interesting, which is he calls it bourgeois. Some people hear bourgeois and they lose their minds and they don't like it, but it's like, okay, we can use a different word. But what he's really describing is like how we had this idea of the public sphere and the private sphere. And the public was, the marketplace, the city, the polis, but the private sphere was known as your house, your family, this sort of zone of anarchy within society. And if you read like The Ancient City by Coulange, he talks about this as well. But like something happened where it's like public and private sort of became inverted, and there's emergence of this sort of intermediary class where it's like the public became embodied in the private. Anyway, long story short, I'm not going to get into it, but like that's a Marxist guy that's talking about an interesting social phenomena that if you're into tradition, if you're into all that old historical stuff, you'll find like, how did we get from there to here? Well, oftentimes it's these guys looking at that, and maybe you don't agree with the terminology, or sometimes the reading of history might be a bit too tilted towards the economic, but like there's stuff in there that could at least inspire you to maybe approach this stuff a different way or add something to your toolkit. Anyway, I don't even know if people are enjoying this. I don't know if this is funny or anything.
Well, I think it's very informative, honestly, and I think that we kind of need to take some lessons from losing for like more than a century straight to our enemies, who, as we see in our sexual degenerates and kind of losers, and they're outright, but at the same time, you kind of need to examine your own flaws in your thinking and strategies. Otherwise, you're going to continue to lose to the vouchers of the world, unfortunately, because that's the ideology that our elites favor. And trying to outsmart them is quite important to understanding the keys to victory here.
Yeah,
But
guys like Vosh are interesting. Vosh and Hassan, because like if you watch these guys are not good. They're not terribly smart, and they're very emotional. They're not well read, and they're lame. They're lame guys. It's like Hassan is like he's a guy who thinks he's a model, but everything comes off as awkward. And so I'm like, I don't get it. And maybe I'm showing my age, but I'm like, we would call this guy a dork. How is he's got money behind him? I don't know what it is, but I don't know how a teenager looks at that and says that guy is so fucking cool. I mean, he looks like dog shit. And he sounds weird and gay. Anyway, I don't want this to be a Hassan hate fest, but like that's where I just feel old.
well, I can kind of let you into the secret as to why, like, some of the younger generations. I can really speak to my generation. Probably some of this does apply to the younger millennials as well. It's kind of like, especially during the early 2000s, nerd culture kind of took over basically from kind of the older jock, athletic kind of football quarterback star of the high school scene, and it kind of became like these intellectual nerds and like video game culture, Marvel movies, Dungeons and Dragons, kind of sort of took over, and that became kind of more acceptable, and like also I had this very strange trend in my childhood, at least during high school and middle school, where bullying was basically like there was a genocide against bullies, like which sounds weird to say, but like that was the one thing that was targeted in the age of the new millennium was like bullies. Like we can't
That's
allow
not a
bullying.
weird thing to say. I've been saying that there was a Holocaust on bullies and no one's talking about it.
No, but it's like they made propaganda. They made movies about this that I had to watch. They, you're not gonna believe this, but this is how cucked Gen Z is. They had this concept that they were going to introduce to, I think it was the school I was attending at the time, where they had a big red button at recess that you could press if somebody was bullying you, which is
It's like the lunk alarm at Planet Fitness.
Yes, it is the same metaphysical concept except gayer somehow, and
See,
basically.
what
Sorry,
bothers
go
me is
ahead.
like I would look at that and immediately figure out a way to use that to bully someone.
No, and I think actually you're correct. The bullies used this to bully other people, so it kind of blew back in their own faces when they tried to implement this. So I think they removed it. So basically, unfortunately, all their propaganda and like basically they made it illegal to bully people, nerds. Unfortunately, in high school, it was completely banned. Like, we want to talk about banning cigarettes, the most discriminated race on people. It is bullies, man. They were like targeted,
Can I
unbelievably
tell you
so.
something? My
Yeah, go
wife
ahead.
told me this the other day, and this is just only tangentially related to what you were saying, but she was talking about when she was very, very young and in school. I don't know, like grade 1 or 2 or whatever. There was like this boy who was kind of shorter than everyone else, and he was mean, and he was a cruel, and he was a bully, and he would shove everyone. And then as a result, no one liked him. And I don't know the kid's name. She was just telling me this. And then one day, this kid's mom went into school to address the class and say that everyone should be nice to him because he goes to bed every night and cries himself to sleep because he's shorter than everyone. And he was just projecting his insecurities on being short. And then I'm hearing that and I'm like, oh, it's over for him. This kid should probably just kill himself. Like it's done. Like the bully part of my brain went active in a way that it hasn't for a decade. I'm like, oh, the things you could do. My God, what has this woman done? Anyway, that's what that I imagine that button would do. I'm like, that would be used immediately to. I don't know how. Give me 5 minutes. I could think of using that big red button to bully 20 girls.
No, I can't imagine the shenanigans that actually happened at the school that actually implemented that. But from what I've heard, it didn't last more than like 1 month or something before they removed the button because of how much it went against their own interest. But kind of back to the topic. um, after this like absolute genocide against bullies in like the late '90s, but especially the early 2000s, when this like the dial was turned up. Before Gamergate, before kind of the Great Awakening, it was the bully gate. That's what was going on, and basically they were removed as like a stopgap measure of preventing nerds and like we'll say nerdy people, kind of more dysmorphic, kind of on the peripheries of high school culture, high school hierarchy, from becoming like higher up the ladder, like kind of normalized, right? Because they were kind of that force that was like, okay, the D&D club needs to have their weekly like shoving into the locker to kind of like let people know that this isn't what's cool. This isn't what you should strive to be for. And that's in a very cruel and crude and very kind of brute force way, but like it kind of worked. It worked for a long time.
Well, I'm interested in hearing your story because my high school, and full disclosure for those listening, because we're probably going to talk about Zoomers a bit. I'm a millennial. I'm in my mid 30s, Canadian. So my perspective, my story might not match up to yours. So, but that's what's going to make it interesting. So for me, I never experienced that cinematic relationship between the jocks and the nerds and whatnot. Because in my high school, we didn't have football, we had rugby up where I am. But you know, the jock, it was often that the athletic guy would also be the valedictorian. And in my recollection, it was the nerds who weren't even particularly academically inclined. Oftentimes, they're like they are now. So a nerd now isn't the smartest guy in the room. He's just hyper focused on some kind of pop culture. So you were a nerd. Again, you kind of referenced D&D there. That's one. Another one would be like Warhammer 40K. Or for me, would be Jinko jeans and having like a samurai sword. You know, cool shit, but, you know, you're really into it. But you were also, the nerds were also very bitter. They're also very judgy. They were the ones who, you know, maybe like a proto incel, whatever you want to call that. But yeah, like they were already kind of like dark figures who wanted to be outcast. And maybe that's when I came up in the early 2000s because everyone was kind of dark and wearing trench coats and shit back then. But like that was my experience. And so that those types of nerds, like oftentimes they were just midwits as well. They took over. And so now the entire culture is hyper focused on nerd shit, but it's not smart stuff. It's not like STEM related things. It's like you're not into science, you fucking love science. You like the abstract, you like the idea of like worshiping a smart guy. It's just Doctor Who. That's all it is. And so, and then girls are involved because they want to fuck Doctor Who, I guess. But yeah, like, but that's what culture is to me. It's very dumb, but it's kind of got a glaze of autism over it, and it's just into nerd shit, which was never that interesting to begin with. Like comic books actually just fucking suck. Most fantasy novels are poorly written. Most nerd stuff is bad. It's always been bad. Marvel didn't just get bad. I was into comics. I worked in a comic store when I was in high school. I'm this guy, and I'm telling you, it's fucking trash all the way down usually. And I know people like a lot of Warhammer 40K. I get it. Warhammer 40K is kind of retarded too, and we like it because of that. But it's all, you know, it's not great stuff really.
No, and none of this like stuff that I was growing up with was good on the peripheries. That was kind of becoming more in the scenes. It's just like with the removal of like kind of the social mechanism for enforcing like what should be promoted in society, kind of the hierarchy, right? There was nothing to kind of stop this promotion of these nerds, and like that, like it became like basically a policy from like the commissars that like, especially these white liberal women, that's like you can't criticize them for being weak or in their nerd hobbies, and we're gonna actually promote their culture because it's actually cool because jocks are mean and mean spirited and they're jerks and they're assholes and they're kind of misogynistic and obviously they didn't say that part out loud yet, but there's a lot of undertones of this like policing by women and like other high school officials, and that basically kind of let them into the mainstream from the periphery, kind of where the stuff belonged, right?
Yeah,
And
well, you raised an interesting point there, in that, at least in my experience, the archetype of the jock, as we're probably all thinking of it, was cooked up in the minds by nerds, often by writers. Like you can go back to Revenge of the Nerds. Like a lot of these types of people became writers and entertainers. They would tell these grandiose stories, but it's not obvious that a lot of these jock archetypes even existed except on the fucking film reels. And so with like that's kind of the whole idea of Gamergate too. This idea of the eternal jock. They're trying to solve the JQ, the jock question. It's always there. It's always this big fucking frat guy. The frat guy is the visual archetype of that. But it's like, is that guy even real as you know it? Or there are frat guys. Oftentimes, frat guys are cool. Have you ever met one? Probably not. But it's this eternal oppressor to you. And that's kind of what Gamergate was, where they just kept seeing that specter everywhere. And gathering the nerds around them against that archetype that wasn't even there to begin with before they turned on those very same nerds eventually.
No, it was just so this like stark thing, right? It is really quite to say what you say. It's like this underlying fantasy from the nerds, right? About like what it really is like the girlfriend that they never got, right? Is what it ultimately is. Because I remember this feeling and seeing these people in high school and everything, and they literally had the underlying mindset of like, I was so nice to her, and she like deserves to notice me for everything that I've done for her, and like it was because of this fucking jock that I didn't get her right, or was invited to the party last Friday, and he was, and that just isn't fair. And there must be something wrong with him, and it was this mindset that was just so it was persuasive and it was growing, it was metastasizing, and I really couldn't pick up on it yet, but I could feel it. Especially in like 2012, I feel like that's where it like hit a climax, where it actually went off the charts. Like it became the majority thought, especially among my generation. I feel like that was a apex year for this trend, becoming basically the mainstream, like normal position among the vast majority.
Yeah, and you as a Zoomer, and I can only assume this will be more pronounced for Gen Alpha, you so for context, I growing up remember a time before the internet. And people in my age or older probably remember being a child and you might have had a computer and there's computers at school. Maybe there's very rudimentary internet, but it wasn't a destination you wanted to go to. The website sucked. You can like go on IRC chats and stuff later on if you knew what to look for, but it wasn't a popular thing. And your life wouldn't be defined by the internet. And yours, I don't know exactly your life experience, but I would assume that you've had more internet culture ingrained in your formative years than I would have. And I think Gen Alpha is just going to be that cranked up to 11. So that means that what we're talking about here, we're talking about a very complex topic. We're talking about the intersection of a lot of different social phenomena. One of them is the proliferation of online communities. A lot of people can craft an identity around a collective that they could never have found to begin with except for online. And so you're seeing the multitudinous proliferations of fandoms as identities. And this is a very big topic. I don't even know if we want to get into it this time. We want to keep it light and easy, breezy, beautiful. But there's this idea that you are coming up in a pretty schizophrenic way. And a lot of the conversations that are emerging right now are like, what is your identity? Your identity feels fractured. You're pulled in too many different directions. And you see that manifested even with sexual identities with younger people. We were talking before we started about how Gen Z is like the gayest generation. And you have to wonder, like, well, is it, or is it just they see silly sexual pronouns as like a new type of fandom? Like how deep are most of these identities? You could maybe this just switches off in a few years. I don't know, but it's a unprecedented way to find yourself growing up. Would you say that's your experience or the experience of others?
I would say that's pretty close to the experience. However, I would say, due to the explosive growth of like anime, and like we'll say prawn, some of these other sexual deviancies, there is a large group of those people actually within Gen Z. It's not just like an artificial identity. However, I will say I don't think they're the majority of like what is it like 40% of Zoomers are gay. That number, I don't. That's obviously artificial. It's obviously because it's regime promoted and you get rewards and you get you get your candy for being a good boy in the eyes of the regime, basically. And like a lot of Zoomers are just like completely isolated, atomized units of like people. Quite frankly, they have no social groups, no socialization. Their entire like conceptualization of a social interaction is nothing more than like a Twitter space, group chat, or like a Discord call, and that's basically it. Zoomers like they don't want to learn how to drive. That's quite a new trend. A lot of Zoomers actually don't have their driver's license or are too scared to drive.
That's interesting.
They have one or zero friends. These are fun facts about my generation.
No, this is good because I don't. I have some contact with Zoomers. We have many friends of the show who are Zoomers, but like we were saying before the show, I don't know if we caught this, but yeah, you hear stats all the time. You know, my generation, we would hear about Zoomers like this is going to be the most base generation. We got videos of them calling out their lesbian teachers or whatever it is. Then you hear that they're the gayest generation, the wokest generation. I never knew which one it was, but once I hear the reports from the ground, it's a bit more nuanced and a bit more interesting because the driver's license thing to me is probably more indicative of something than the gay thing. And if you want to keep listing off bullet points, I'd love to hear them.
No, I'm going to do that, but of course, we have a super chat from and another wonderful patron, Mr. Michael, who is listening to the stream zonged out on flu, gang represent. Well, Michael, I wish you a speedy recovery in that flu, and I greatly appreciate your patronage to the show. Definitely 07's in chat for that wonderful patronage, right-wing patronage, which is based and not cringe. Oh yeah, getting back to facts about my generation. Yeah, most of them don't. Gen Z is so feminized because we're basically raised by women. Like the vast majority of our households are single mothers who babied us. Kind of, I'll say like it's helicopter parenting basically, except from a female point of view on everything, especially as a man. Like you're required to ask permission to go to the bathroom in like high school, and that was kind of socially enforced type of generational ethos. The father, if you had one, was weak, not assertive, and like when he tried to be assertive in a sort of like order and like some basic morality in the family, right? You're not going to do this gay thing, right? He was kind of socially de-enforced from doing that, right? And like threatened, like if you keep doing that, we're going to use these mechanisms of the state to take you away or do other things like that. So this is Gen Z's like entire childhood, all these things I'm listening to, and that basically leaves them being the most risk averse, like don't want to take any risk or do anything meaningful kind of generation.
And what's interesting is we were talking about Habermas and the structural transformation of the public sphere just there. And that almost is what we're talking about, the inversion of the public and private, where in the household used to have something like not just like the father is the authority, but you had a form, you had a structure. But now it's like there is no structure to the form. It's just the outside world imposing on the life. And the one was the least amount of power would be the father because again, full context, I'm a recent father myself. I have a 8 months old son, and it's interesting seeing being a parent now and comparing your experience to your parents or your grandparents and understanding and looking at it from that perspective where it becomes real, where the rubber meets the road, where you say, okay, I don't have any rights. My kid can just make stuff up and get taken away, and he doesn't know the ramifications of what he says. And then there's case like make up a lie about his mom because he's mad about his mom, whatever it might be. And then there's like divorce courts and all that, which is pretty bad in Canada. So everything's been inverted, and there is no role for you to have like your own family space. The community, the society at large is always imposing. The private has become the public, and the only thing that's allowed to be private is like people with like power and influence. But you don't get to be a private individual or really have a private space anymore. And like I was saying, you mentioned the feminization, and I think that's reached a fever pitch with Zoomers. However, we could trace that all the way back to Gen X as well. A lot of people probably remember the movie Fight Club, and that was one of the famous scenes in that book where you have Tyler Durden saying that we're a generation raised by women, and that was Gen X, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And it's both direct, raised by single mothers or families with mothers in charge, or there's this idea of the longhouse, some people call it, but it could also just be feminized society, that
Yeah, basically, it's the thesis that if the father was there, he was a bitch.
yeah.
Always.
And he's internalized a lot of it too. He's internalized, and there's again, what this is once again like an intersection of a lot of social phenomena. This is also the growth of what we might call the therapeutic state, the psychoanalyzation of everything, the penalization of masculine characteristics wherever you might find them, even in children. There's a lot of phenomena operating at the same time to make it this way, which means that there's no easy fix. But the feminization is that the man adopts more female, not only behaviors but also pattern recognition. Like, you start policing each other in feminine ways. And then there's people who try to pendulum swing back against that, but they do it in really kind of baroque and aggressive ways. Like, that's every few years we get a new guy. Right now it's the Andrew Tate. Prior to that it was like Dick Masterson or something. There's always like a guy who comes out. It's like, it's masculine energy. It's gonna be rape or something. It's like it's like a low resolution cartoon version of what I think guys are looking for. Anyway, I said a lot of things there. I don't want to trample your points.
Yeah, and like obviously that stuff is very cringe and gay. What the Andrew Tates of the world kind of represent. However, kind of what they're capturing and like building off their kind of mini empire, online empires off of is this feeling, especially among Gen Z, is like it's this craving for that that authoritative father figure that was allowed in the past to be there. That like I had a grandfather figure who kind of acted in this role, right? Who viewed himself as a pillar of the community, which meant that he enforced social mores of the community, kept bad figures out, permutated in like local activities, social clubs, that sort of thing. Part of various local organizations working in the actual community. He was a member of the actual community. It's sort of a patriarchal figure, which was basically anathema to Gen Z. That didn't really exist for most people. I'm lucky that I at least was exposed to traditional masculinity that was actually in a healthy way. Because I was raised by Gen X. I was raised by the same minds that you're talking about. I was raised by the Gen X kind of phenomenon there. And so my father didn't really have that kind of mindset. He had this kind of warped vision, and he was kind of a bitch. I hate to say that. But he kind of was, though. But it was those times where he acted like an actual patriarchal figure that I really kind of viewed him with respect. And that's what they're craving, the young men.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of these might call them demagogues latch onto is that craving. And let me just say this: we'll probably at some point, we're talking about generations right now, Zoomers, Millennials. It will likely come to pass that we'll end up mentioning Boomers or complaining about Boomers in some way. I just wanted to state outright that I am not a fan or an advocate of this interesting thing that we do in this culture, which is we subdivide the generations into almost different teams. And we talked about this on my show recently. And even my co-host Judas was, well, we need names for them. And I'm like, well, that's historically distinct. If you go back to the 1700s, we didn't have generations almost as teams you were a part of that existed in opposition to other generations, as if they were like a different fucking species than you. So like the way we talk about boomers are as if they're foreigners or something, which is an odd way of approaching it. And I try and, which isn't to say that they're not distinct historical circumstances that created boomers that maybe you can complain about some behaviors, but let's be fair here. There's a lot you can complain to millennials about. However, just setting this up by saying that I don't partake in that. And also what's interesting is with subsequent generations, we're starting to subdivide those generations too, with people saying like, I'm a high millennial, I'm a low millennial, I'm sort of a mid-zoomer. Like we're fracturing those 20-year generations into the high end and the low end as distinct identities in themselves. And Marshall McLuhan kind of talks about this, about the utility of time segmentation and sort of a capitalist society. Anyway, I won't get into that. But this is a roundabout way of saying that as a Zoomer, and maybe you can correct me on this, it seems to me that you we're entering a political situation and a historical period where you really can't trust anything. And I think the boomers had a different experience. So the boomers, and this is just a fact I've seen, they are more trusting of institutions. They're more trusting of the news, especially TV. If it doesn't happen on TV, it's not real. And if something is on TV, it is more real to your average boomer. But millennials are like this too, but Zoomers and Gen Alpha, they don't trust politicians. And I mean, they really don't trust politicians. Like, they don't even pay attention to what politicians are saying. They don't trust journalists. Journalism's fucking dead. No one's reading this shit. They don't trust technocrats. They don't trust school. Like, there's no trust in any institution. And we will often comment on that, like, oh, of course they don't trust it. But no, but really think about that. An entire generation that doesn't trust anything that society is telling them, to the point where the government can say there's UFOs and they've known about UFOs for half a century and nobody gives a shit and everyone assumes it's a lie. Like that, it's wild to think about it. And what does that mean long term? But I think that's when people try and look at what Zoomers are going through. I'm like, I explain this to boomers. I'm like, there is no trust in the government, in anything, period. And that's a strange way to live if you really think about it. Anyway, I threw a lot of shit there too. What do you think of that?
No, I think you're grasping on a trend that is quite prevalent in Gen Z and especially Gen Alpha. Is that we kind of grew up in this, like, I was born in 2002, so I came about just before, like, when society was quote unquote normal, and you could sort of just be normie, like, the grill pill, the fanciful grill pill, if they would just leave you alone if you were apolitical. Like, I lived in that world for a little bit, then immediately everything went down the water slide, as I like to say, and that was no longer viable. And, like, also what I started noticing happening was, like, all of these, like, promises, right, that the boomers and the Gen X and the millennials, to a lesser extent, were told from their childhood. If you just go through school and you do the good thing, if you act like a good guy and sort of believe in these principles, like, you'll get a good job and you'll be able to afford a house, have a family and kids, and, like, the government looks after your interest, and, like, Social Security and all these things are there to benefit you, and they're always going to be there for you. And that was true for them, so obviously I understand why they're very more trusting of institutions, right? However, with our generation, like, all those promises were broken, essentially. None of them were kept, right? And what was so frustrating about it was, like, you were kind of told this, explicitly and implicitly. These are the things that were going to get to you. If you just went through the system, you're gonna get a house. You live in the greatest country in the world. Like, you're gonna get a good job. You're gonna get a good family. You're gonna get a wife. You're gonna be able to afford all these things. Go on 2 vacations every year. If you just become part of the mainstream liberal culture, it's all gonna be given to you. Just do this thing. It's all gonna happen to you. And basically, none of it came to fruition, and, like, all of it's gotten worse. Especially if you're a white man, you're the enemy. And that's kind of where Gen Z and Gen Alpha is coming from. Is that all their promises have been broken. They've kept nothing. And if you continue to go down their system, right, the life they promote of becoming a bugman, like, your life's just going to be absolutely, like, living hell, basically. And only the weak-minded, like, vast majority wants to go through that. But, like, the people who aspire for higher things that are not a midwit, I'll just say,
Yeah.
kind of realize
And also,
this stuff.
a lot of people will correctly point out, people talk about collapse scenarios, they talk about revolutions, civil wars, and they'll correctly point out that, things need to get a lot worse before people will take up arms against the government or whatever it might be. But I would say to them, I'm like, that's being stress tested right now, because, like you'd said, a lot of the things that were keeping people in line, that were keeping people wedded to the status quo, aren't there anymore. And maybe it hasn't hit them yet. Or maybe the pot's been boiling just slow enough they don't notice. But I'm like, there's a palpable nihilism that I see creeping up. And I don't know what form that takes in the next 10 years. Because, like you'd said, like, you're starting to, what's funny, you mentioned, like, the grill people, the normies, the ones who just want to check out. We kind of saw what happens when those people politically awaken. That was the Q movement. That was the MAGA movement. That was a whole bunch of grill dads being told that, oh, your vote doesn't matter. Or at least they believe that. They believe that the system that they believed in is broken. And they went crazy. And I'm not trying to make a judgment on the Q people. I actually like the Q anon types. I think they can be spoken to. That's a gen. It's large. If you look at them, who are they? A lot of them are Gen Xers. A lot of them are. They skew older. They skew middle class. They're family people. They're people with fucking 401ks. They lost their mind when they got red pilled because that's what the red pill does to you. It's not fun. And they just went crazy and started believing all kinds of kooky things. Well, that's almost everyone's getting a bit kookier and crazier because it's hitting them that the system is fundamentally broken. There's not a lot of people left to defend it. And I think, like I was saying before, I think Zoomers and Gen Alpha are the ones I'm really interested in because they were also the ones that came up during COVID. I don't know what they look like in 15 years. That's going to be A, interesting, B, horrifying, C, all of the above. I don't know.
I feel really bad for Gen Alpha personally, because as bad as Gen Z is, I at least grew up in a world before like internet took over your like social life. Like I grew up in a world where you actually hanged out with your friends in the subdivision, right? And you would go out and like climb a tree and like ride your bicycle to places and like go out and hang out with your friends at their house, right? I grew up in that world where you would do these things and that was normal, right? Everything was just normal. It wasn't insane. There was no there wasn't this sense that like reality was not fine, is what I'll say. Like it was a very looking back on it, obviously that wasn't gonna hold in that current society, but I at least had that. Gen Alpha has none of that. They're like thrust into the matrix, basically, like full throated, like going 10 miles an hour on a freight train. Like they don't even like, they've never been exposed to a healthy social system in their entire existence, right? They're basically the iPad generation. And what I mean by that is not only are they raised by single moms, right, in this society, but sort of like their outsourcing of parenting is coming from like the iPad, and they're kind of raised by like YouTube and Twitter, like Snapchat and like TikTok, which is absolutely horrifying. So they're being programmed from like day one, essentially, as soon as they're able to like look at an iPad properly and fire off dopamine receptors. So Gen Alpha doesn't look promising at all in the slightest.
Yeah. And also, one thing that I just want to circle back to is that, once again, I'm not a fan of these hard demarcations between the generations, because I hear stories about Gen Alpha and I can see a clear gradation through Gen Z, through millennials, through Gen X, right even through boomers, because everyone wants to complain about boomers. Well, how did boomers get to the way they are? Probably their parents. What about that generation? Like, we're all links in a chain. And like we were talking about before, about how we create these sort of fandoms or teams around our generation in opposition to other generations. I think that works against us. I think, when I hear millennials complaining about Zoomers, I'm like, we're not really that different. Even my wife, she's 5 years younger than me. And so we're both millennials technically. And she had made a comment about how I can remember MySpace. She's like, you remember MySpace? I don't remember MySpace. Isn't that weird? I'm like, I guess, but also it's just a fucking social media platform. Who gives a shit? You know what I mean? But we define ourselves so rigidly by smaller and smaller windows of time, and those windows contain frivolous things. It's like, oh man, do you remember Jinko jeans? Do you remember fucking frosted tips? You don't? I guess you're a different species. I'm like, we're inventing divisions a lot of the time. And I think that works against any long-term survival we have. And I'm not sure that's even just in the West. They might have this in Japan too. I'm not sure. I know some guys who are big in Japan. Maybe they could tell me. But what's interesting is this thing called the boomer generation was seen everywhere globally. So I think there's some commonality there.
Yeah, it's this trend you see with the American Empire, right? That like whenever there's a trend in the American Empire, it kind of spreads out to the empire, and then the vassals, and then kind of the periphery afterwards, right? And it becomes kind of mainstreamized into whatever culture it seeps into.
Well, everyone
It's
said
like
everyone's like, oh, the boomers, like a baby boom happened everywhere. I'm like, even in Germany after World War II. How? You know what I mean? Like the places that weren't looking too good. This is what I'm told. I'm not even vouching for it, but I'm like, I've heard you're telling me the baby boom happened in China. I don't know about that, but anyway, I'm just doubting my own point.
No, I mean from like a culture perspective, not in terms of like them having more children, in terms of this like generationalized like kind of
Yeah, yeah.
specialization that you were kind of referring to earlier, not kind of demographic or population boom in
Oh no,
that kind
I
of
don't
sense.
make no mistake. I was arguing with myself, not against you. I would never do that.
No, I wouldn't hope so. But I think we're kind of meandering around this topic, unless you kind of want to dive deeper. But I think I kind of want to talk about, since you referred to yourself as, you're from the land of maple leaves and soy. So kind of tell me about the land of the leaves a little bit, kind of from the American, point
Well,
of
it's
view.
interesting because a lot of my friends are Americans, and I'm friendly with that group, the Old Glory Club. A lot of those guys as well, and a lot of Americans in various movements, and they have conceptualizations of Canada, varying resolutions. It's more interesting than a lot of people would think. And there's a lot I could say. I'm going to try and summarize it. So, and there's a couple other guys who in this scene who I'm sure you're familiar with. There's this guy named Black Horse, Gio Pinaccetti as well. A lot of these guys, they've talked about Canada before, and I had Black Horse on my show, and he introduced the idea of this sort of conflict in Canada between East versus West. A lot of people think it's conservative versus liberal because we have a similar political axis here in Canada, left versus right, even though it's parliamentary. And I'm of the belief that it's a fundamental component of the nation form of the state that it has a left right axis no matter what it is. It just has that duality. It's just what parties it's populated by. So we have several political parties, but they all follow along the left right axis, and there's just more left parties. And what are known here as the conservatives would probably be pretty close to the Democrats in the US. Like I don't, people have their opinions about Republicans in the US. There's nothing really like Republicans up here. The closest you'd get is the People's Party of Canada, but even then, it's not really. It's very milk toast. There's a lot of guns in Canada, but there's no firm amendments about it. One of the things we covered on our show, we did a whole clip on Canadian law. And here's the funny thing about constitutions and laws, if anyone's curious, the shorter it is, the better. What you want is the uh, clarity of being succinct. Whereas Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Human Rights Code are these long, legalistic, labyrinthine documents full of weasel words and asterisks where you are afforded rights within reason. Well, who defines what's reasonable? Who defines what's in spirit? Like, we believe in the spirit of Canada. Who defines what the spirit is? Well, whoever the fucking judge is at the time. And if you've noticed the population of judges in the US and in Canada trending towards borderline retarded black women, well, that's a big deal, actually. So, there's lots of guns in Canada. There's not enough laws protecting guns as rigidly as in America. That's interesting. The what you might understand as like the North versus the South in America would be the East versus the West up here, with the most progressive and liberals centered in Ontario, versus the West, and that's where you get your Albertas, that's where you get your Manitobas and stuff. So there's like an East-West conflict with like these what we call the Laurentian elites, as explained by Black Horse, in Ontario, versus the Westerns. And it's not a country that's terribly well held together, in my opinion. A couple things that are interesting about Canada. Here's a fact that each province, we have provinces, not states, each province has a stronger trade relationship with the United States at their southern border than they do with each other. So there's not a lot of internal trade between the provinces, which mean, and Quebec, as a good example, is always trying to lead. They're like our Texas. They're always trying to secede. It's a nation kind of held together very loosely. We're in the process of being more or less taken over by China, and that's not a joke. That's real. We did a series of not a series, two solid episodes on the intrusion of China through the West Coast. That would be British Columbia, primarily through the fentanyl trade. So if you've noticed a fentanyl problem in America, it's probably coming from Canada. And there was a time in the 90s and early 2000s where the Hong Kong triads owned like 90% of the fentanyl trade in North America. They were above. They were on the level of cartels. What the cartels are to cocaine, the triads were to fentanyl. They controlled the entire distribution, and they did it through Canada because the triads own so much real estate in Canada. Now, how did the Hong Kong triads, how did they get there? Well, they work hand in glove with the Chinese Communist Party. And people can call, conspiracy all they want. We covered several books written by pretty renowned journalists who outline the relationship that the CCP has with the triads, because the fentanyl is produced in factories in like Macau and other places owned by China. So, like, how does that happen unless the Chinese Communist Party wants it to? Anyway, the influence of China in Canada is very, very profound right now. It's something that even liberals are talking about. China holds huge sways of the real estate markets, and the Chinese organized crime is a big problem. Anyway, so this has interestingly resulted, at least in my view, in Canada being seen as a bit of a liability in the intelligence community, because Canada is a member of what's known as the Five Eyes intelligence community. That's several Western countries who share intelligence and work with each other against terrorism, organized crime, things like that. And the story from my perspective seems to be that Canada has become such a fucking Mr. Magoo about everything. It's so infiltrated. It's so lousy with spies and leaks that I don't think Canada's taken seriously by anyone anymore. And I'm giving you a lot of information right here. I'll give you one last thing. There's a lot I could say, but I'm going to try and keep this focused. And this is tied to the last point, that Canadian infrastructure is pretty limited. So a lot of people are probably aware that Canada is a big place. Most of the population hugs the southernmost border, and it's clustered within a few urban centers. That would be Vancouver, that would be Montreal, that would be Toronto, Calgary. There's a few ones, but there's a few big ones. Only like 30 something million people that live here. Most of it is just forest and ice. Anyway, what that means is that there's not a lot of infrastructure per se, even though it's a highly socialized. I have to be careful here because people probably have a conceptualization of Canadian healthcare that's not as good as they probably think it is. The Canadian healthcare system is a joke, and I could talk for a bit about that. But having people in my family who've gone through serious issues, there's a reason why we have medical assistance in dying up here, which is quite literally the government recommending that you commit suicide. That's a thing that happens now because the wait lines are just so long, basically. The lack of infrastructure means that when an event occurs like the trucker protest, which a lot of people might know about, and a lot of your listeners, the anti-COVID trucker convoy that went across Canada, drove to our nation's capital in Ottawa, and protested COVID lockdowns. The government would have loved to stop that, but it couldn't. There just weren't enough cops. There wasn't enough RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. There just wasn't enough. We wish we had a militarized police to stop that, but we don't. Now, that's interesting. Some people can laugh at that. But if you are a political dissident, if you are someone who is worried about being oppressed or persecuted by the government, that presents certain opportunities. The opportunity is that it can't. It's a mess up here. And there's more opportunities presented to dissident minds or those on the political right, maybe more up here than in America. And that might be a controversial take, but I think a driven or ambitious individual or group could probably get something going up here because our political system is also such a mess right now. Anyway, once again, I threw a lot at you there. If there's anything you'd like to zero in on there or ask me about, let me know.
No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, right? Also, I think I'll say this as an American: the Canadian elite are just like so much more incompetent than the U.S. elite. And believe me, the American elite are getting more retarded. However, they're not the level of like just like pure kind of incompetent, like weak leadership as Justin Trudeau, right? So if something like that happened in America, where a group of like, let's say right wing people, truckers mostly, decided to block off supply roads to major cities in America, and it actually started, kind of harming their bread and circuses, right? And like stopped medical shipments to cities, right? The population, the bases of power, right, for the regime. They would not hesitate to like use the police forces, the military, civil, kind of local guard units to put that down and break it up, right? If force is necessary, right? And they would just do that. Now they're losing the ability to do that. However, I feel like if Trudeau wanted to do that, he just couldn't because he's just too inept. There isn't the system of incompetent bureaucrats. Kind of, it's the sort of bureaucrats I'm talking about, like Henry Kissinger, right? The pure Machiavellians who will just do whatever it takes to maintain the power and system of the regime they're a part of, right? And do it very
Yeah.
competently.
And also there's a reason for that. And there's a few reasons, but I think a big one that Canadians are probably familiar with is that America is a big brain drain of Canada. That me, as someone who lives here growing up, it was always understood that if you wanted, we've got University of Toronto, we've got McGill University, we've got some great universities, but it's no Harvard, it's no Princeton, it's no Yale, and we don't have a Hollywood. We don't have, like, if you want to make it, there's still this belief that you got to go to America. You got to go to Silicon Valley. We don't really have a Silicon Valley here. We have something like that. We got some interesting things happening, but it's nothing like what's going on in America. So if you are, and yeah, I think Elon Musk went to school here, but you know what I mean? Like, did he live in Canada? Like, he was born in South Africa, but I think he lived in Canada for a bit. Anyway, doesn't matter. But there is a brain drain. And that's not a value judgment. That's just something that happens. But then you also point correctly to Trudeau. Like, my co-host Judas would probably disagree with me. We've disagreed on this before, but I had made the comment that I kind of like that Trudeau's there because someone competent might be worse for someone like me, but someone who is internationally regarded as a buffoon, like, okay, maybe we can kind of do something over here before the hammer comes down. And it is like he is as dumb as they wanted to believe Trump was. You know what I mean? Like, he is, like, he does the dumbest shit imaginable, but just kind of gets away with it. And that's where you look and you're like, the point I was going to make before, which is that and some Canadians might disagree with me, and I don't want to sound too negative, but there is more of a feeling up here that it's over. It's that nothing, we need to figure out what we're doing now. Whereas in America, there's a sense that you could rehabilitate an American identity. You can salvage America. You can work with what you got. I think there's more of a sense in Canada that there's not as grounded an identity as the American identity, or like a Southern American identity even. Like, you still got like Dixie guys out there who will like die for the Confederate flag. I really do think, like, if you look at the mass migration numbers, if you look at the situation up here, and if you look at, as dumb as Trudeau is, he got voted in twice, and and it was a pretty, not a overwhelming victory, but like, everyone knew how bad he was, but he kept getting voted back in. You're like, okay, well then, I don't know, man. It's fucking over. We got to figure out a new thing, because it's not going to be voting. It's not going to be, appealing to elites, and it's not going to be a rediscovering of Canada. And some of the monarchists and the red Tories will probably disagree with me on that, but that's just the feeling I get from people on the ground, that it's that nihilism of it. It's, this country's fucking done. It's a mess. But what do we do with that? Where can we go from here? What can be built? Anyway, sorry, I kind of cut you off with another ramble there.
Yeah, I'm curious as an American. Like, I hear this from some of the other Canadians in the sphere, right? There's this sense among the Canadians that, like, it's been this way for a long time, but, like, there's no sense of what it means to be Canadian. Like, there's no, like, the cultural, like, historical roots are just, like, erased, like, in the minds of most Canadians. And, like, their social, political identity is revolved around, progressive, like, politics, right? There's no historical conception of even, like, a nation of Canada, right? Is that correct?
That's overall correct. You would need to go provincially, and within there, you would find sort of regional identities. Like if you were to go to Quebec, you would find a distinct Quebecois identity and some very, very successful Quebecois nationalist movements and some pretty effective terrorist movements as well with the FLQ. But if you go province by province, you wouldn't find something distinctly Canadian, probably. You might find, like in Alberta, you'd probably find something like an Alberta identity. That's like a cowboy sort of identity. Sometimes with Canada, it's hard to figure out which identities aren't just borrowed from America. You know what I mean? But the Maritimes are interesting. On the East Coast, you find some distinct stuff there. But a unifying Canadian identity, I would say no. And it's more of like a confederation of provinces. And a lot of what we know is like the Canadian flag is relatively new. A lot of this shit came about in the 80s and 90s. And we covered this a bit on our show about there's this great book by, I believe it's George Scott. Is it George Scott or George Grant? I think it's George Grant, called Lament for a Nation. It's basically outlining the death of Canadian nationalism. And this was written back in the 1940s. So you will find, aside from these sort of ethnic or geographic identities, you'll have people like the monarchists or the red Tories. So these would be the people that say Canadian identity is fundamentally British. And if you go around a lot of towns, a lot of cities in Ontario where I'm at, there's a lot, you'll see the word loyalist a lot. There's still like loyalist college, loyalist street, loyalist this and that, because the British identity still sits pretty strongly, at least in this region. But it begs the question, is that an animating force? Is that something that's going to get the kids to rise up, being like a British monarchist? I say no. I got nothing against them. That to me is insufficient as a distinct Canadian identity. I think that's even insufficient for a lot of British nationalists right now, and that's their own problem. So I don't, you know what I mean? But that's something that we're negotiating right now. And that's something I even wrote about on my site, the Vanguardist Journal, and a few of our associated groups talk about that. Like, if there is not an obvious Canadian identity, what would it look like if we decided to craft one? An interesting way to look at that is there's this great book that you might have heard of called Albion Seed, by George Hackett Fisher, I think it is. And it kind of charts the foundation of America and Canada through these four distinct British folkways. Like how this where Appalachia came from. This is where the Protestantism came from. But it was saying, like, how do you define a people? Anthropologically, how do you define a people? And it broke it down into 40 characteristics. And if you could answer these 40 characteristics, like what is it? What's your religion ways, your clothing ways, your child rearing ways? Like there's ways every distinct people does something. If you could answer that bullet list, you might have the makings of a distinct people. It doesn't need to be wholly unique, but if you can actually conceptualize yourself as that, then you're on your way to some kind of nationalistic self-determination. And I think there's a lot of Canadians right now that are at least starting to ask those very, very deep intellectual questions. Anyway, that's my speech on that.
Yeah, in America, there is this big divide, as you mentioned, between North and South, especially because we fought a war over it, and wars typically signify that there is like a genuine like ethnic groups who actually fight for their own like kind of ethnic interest in history over the perceived majority trying to rule or govern them. And so that does create a genuine like cultural distinction in the United States, although it's kind of more relegated to like bumper stickers and like Confederate flag type Southern nationalism today. However, the interesting thing I see in Canada, especially with Quebec, right, is it's this more like kind of European continent liberal nationalism as it's been described to me, right? Because of course they're French, right? So it would be like they'll sort of support a position as like French only in Quebec, right? And like they'll punish you if you don't speak it, right? However, at the same time, they'll be like promote gay marriage and sodomy, right? And kind of really won't promote the Catholic Church, right? And it's this very different nationalism, right? It's sort of this ethnic distinction, right? Is that the way you would describe them, right? Because that's the main like separation of Canada, right, since its founding, right, is the French and like English settlers.
Yeah, I don't know if it has a distinct foundation myth, and that's another thing that's kind of being ripped out from us right now. We're ripping down statues of our first prime minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. But you actually raise a good point there that the Canadian identity, you know, when you're in Canada, it's a bilingual nation. It's English and French, and it would like to be, you know, mutually beneficial. But there's always been a strong demarcation between English and French. There's hostilities between English and French, in fact. So that's an interesting, I don't know, just an interesting phenomenon to look at. Like, we've never joined up, and we've always been divided along those lines linguistically, but also culturally. Just a couple of things I noticed in the chat here. Just one, Patrizzi correctly identified that Lament for a Nation was written in 1965. I don't know why I always think it came out earlier. I always think of the 40s, but it was the 60s, and he was mentioning Prime Minister Diefenbaker at the time, so that makes sense. And we got one from Nico here, which is pretty interesting. I assume he's calling me wrong. Rude. But culture does not give identity. There's plenty of trouser wearing, beer growing forest dwellers in Europe, and yet they've had 1,000 different identities. Identity comes from a story. Think 1776. Language equals nation. Now, language equals nation is interesting. I think there's part of that I think is correct. There's part I might disagree with. I think, you know, identity does emerge through self-determination. Like, there are lots of identities that can be stacked. You know, I do think there's this great book we covered, which is The Construction of a Nation by Adrian Hastings, I think. And you could actually chart the formation of the nation state up through the nation as a people, and how the people define themselves as a more sophisticated collective. And of course, language is in there. And language, you know, people discount the importance of language, because language effectively is everything. Language is how you conceptualize yourself, and our communication ways are essential to self-conceptualization. So I do agree. I agree with language equals nation. That's a fair comment. Identity comes from a story. Think 1776. True. Maybe we could spend some time on that one. Like, are we saying that you need a foundation myth? Yes, I think that's right. I think you would even see that in like the French Caribbean. And a nation state, what's interesting about a nation state, it doesn't necessarily need to be a civilization level. You could have a small nation. You could have a nation of a few thousand people if it has sufficient self-identity and self-awareness. What else do you say? But there's plenty of trouser wearing, beer growers, forest dwellers in Europe, and yet they have had 1,000 different identities. I might take exception to that. Anyway, I don't want to spend too long on that. I just wanted to point out that there's some good stuff in there, and we do cover this on the show. We spent several episodes going into great detail about the formation of nations. I know we're getting past an hour now, so I don't know how much time you have to spend on this. But
I have plenty of time. Like, go as long as you want to. But I think the main critique I would have, he's not wrong about the founding mythos and language being core to being a distinct people and nation. I do agree with that. However, you run into like the modern like kind of problem with liberalism, right? I'll just bring up France for example, right? France used to have a major colony in Africa, right? And they francophoned it, right, by making them speak French. Now you run into the problem of like, well, with this post, like, you know, enlighten them an idea of like all people are equal, right? Well, they speak French, so therefore they're part of the culture. So we can just welcome them in. Never mind like ethnic distinctions and everything, because those actually don't exist, right? Because all human beings are fundamentally interchangeable under the liberal idea, and so you have that problem of like in that framework and like moral system, you can't justify yourself with nationalism because that's fundamentally evil against the system and like kind of state religion, and so you kind of have this endless like importing of like another population, but like you can't really fight it in that framework because like, well, they speak French, so they're just as French as anyone else, right? And after all, what's wrong with that? They're finally fitting, you know, the liberal kind of conception of France, right? And that's where I see the big issue.
that's an interesting point. So if you if you believe in the foundation myth and you speak the language, can anyone be a member of that group? Well, obviously, we would say no. So that would imply that there is a biological or a geographical component to this as well. And there's also an interesting thing, just to circle back to what Nico was saying. There's this fascinating book. It's written from an anarchist perspective, but it's a very serious anarchist perspective. It's called Seeing Like a State by James C. Scott. And Nico made a comment here about in what is now France, there used to be 3 big languages, and those were destroyed in order to create the nation of France. You also saw something similar with German unification. Like prior to this nation known as Germany, there was a whole collection of city-states and smaller nation-states that, through the course of intellectual pressures and politicking and almost the demands of sovereignty, became this thing called Germany and created the German people. Now, what's interesting is how that negotiation happens. And there's this quote by Samuel Huntington, who wrote Clash of Civilizations. He defined a civilization as the largest we that we would feel comfortable in. You know, because you can negotiate a civilization of different sizes, and people like, can the West be a civilization, or is it just Europe and America? Can you feel comfortable in this thing called the West, or are you overreaching, right? So that's almost what the same negotiation is happening during when you create a nation state. It's like, can you create a nation state with these people? Do you have enough in common? Do you feel like they're your kin? In the case of Germany, you could create a German people and generate that from within without it being a colonial project, because this is sometimes done externally through colonial projects, and those rarely work. But then another case would be America. Once again, America was founded by 4 distinct folkways, 4 distinct religions, and yet there's this thing called America, and yet there's this thing called an American. You know, the Appalachian would and the Southerner would see themselves both as Americans, even though they were 4 completely different groups when they arrived in America. Same thing with Canada. Like Canada and the US might see themselves as kin, despite a lot of differences in ethnography and religion and politics and everything else. So the point being that sometimes when, like what James Scott was saying with Seeing Like a State, he was saying that it's often government projects that strip away the humanity. They strip away all these peculiarities of language and folkways and stuff. And like, true, sometimes that happens through a state project that's foisted upon the people. It cited Paris as an example, how they completely reconstructed Paris from its kind of organic growth into this sort of like imperium-like grid. But sometimes you can have this coalescing occur naturally. You can have the languages just merging into one without it being a colonial project. And it can, you know, like the languages can fall away and be destroyed, not through coercion or violence. That's just, anyway, I don't want to spend too long on this, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think you're accurate. I don't think it's always this malevolent force which kind of destroys these more like distinct cultural and linguistic polities that exist in like all nations, right? Like I think of a good example of this is like Spain, right? When Spain kind of reunified in the wake of Muslim conquest, right? I mean,
Yeah, and also remember what would cause people to want to do this? That's the one thing I didn't. Sorry to cut you off. The reason people do this to begin with is because they want to achieve some level of sovereignty. They say we're stronger together than when we're apart. That's kind of the idea of the United States. We're stronger together. That's what's keeping Canada together. In fact, that's what's keeping the EU together. That as much as we might disagree, we've decided that we're stronger together, and that's how we achieve that level of sovereignty. And in the 19th and 20th century, oftentimes that was because there's an aggressor somewhere over there that wants to take us over. And so we need to unify, and we actually want to unify because we don't want to be fucking rolled over. Anyway, sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah, but I think that's a fair point. It is kind of like for this collectivization purpose, right? With the birth of like modern nation states in like the early 17th, 18th, and 19th century, it kind of just became necessary.
And that's also what's happening right now. And again, some people don't like that book, Clash of Civilizations, but the argument in that book is an interesting argument. To circle back to what we were talking about at the start, you can probe into things maybe you disagree with and find little nuggets in there. So one thing he talks about in the book is that in the 21st century, the types of conflicts we're seeing aren't so much national as they are civilizational. And by civilizations, he means a larger grouping of nation states. So this would be like the West versus the East, or Europe as one collective bloc against Islam. Islam, which is its own even though there's internal inconsistencies with Islam, even though there's certain subsects that are warring, there is this general movement of a unified Islam against its oppressors or aggressors. And he's saying that what you're seeing in global conflicts is these very very familiar historical fault lines start to emerge between the East and the West. And the question is, can the West unify into one sovereign bloc? Now, as an American, you might look at that and say, well, that's effectively what they have right now with NATO. There's some people call that Turbo America, this idea that the Western world as we know it really has America at the center, and then Europe as its vassal states. And that's more or less what the war in Ukraine is about. But how long can that last? And can the Eastern powers, the BRICS countries, that we're talking Russia, we're talking Iran, we're talking China, can they unify to counterbalance America? Now that's an interesting discussion entirely, but that's the sort of like 10,000 feet looking down bird's eye view of like where the powers are collecting right now. Now, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's again another whole topic I just introduced that I won't go down.
You're great at doing that. Yeah, I think that kind of is important about collectivizing against like external like civilizational threats, right? And it's kind of what the Crusades were about, right? It was this like force called Christendom uniting against like the force known as Islam, right? And it was a civilizational thing of like you kind of need to all come together against this threat, otherwise you will be like conquered in things. And I think that's where the mindset comes from. However, the problem with the American Empire's rule is that they make everything gay, and they import liberalism everywhere they go, and then that allows for cancer to like a mass migration and the idea that like the stupid idea that like Britain is an idea. It's always been a nation of immigrants. Like stuff like that is just like plainly not true becomes fact by fiat of like the empire essentially, and that's why the empire is bad. Not that collectivization for civilizational defense is bad in of itself. However, who's dictating the terms and like rule is what the pertinent question of the day is in regards to that politics and power.
That's true. And I wonder, let me ask you this, just to bring it back to something that's maybe a bit more enjoyable. I wonder, and this will sound crazy to a lot of people, but I wonder if we will, within our lifetimes, within the next few years, see the recession of a lot of this gay shit. And I think it's going to start with the trans movement. I think that's become a bit too toxic, a bit too embarrassing. I think we're going to start seeing that roll back. I think we're going to see a lot of the popularity of the LGBT stuff roll back. I don't know when, but I think if that were to happen, there's this one thing I always talk about, that we on the right aren't really prepared for when we win, when our arguments are accepted by the mainstream. And my fear, I wouldn't even say fear, my certainty is that when this trans thing kind of gets deemed as toxic and recessive, it'll be blamed on white people. Just like feminism will be blamed on white women. White women are going to be holding the bag for a lot of this shit. And all the regardless of how the racial demographics of homosexuality are broken out, it's going to be blamed on white people. And just like COVID, you're seeing like liberals start accepting the right's COVID narratives in really strange ways, and they're just taking that from us. We don't get those narratives anymore. We don't get to be right about COVID. RFK Jr. gets to be right about COVID. The liberals get to be right about COVID, and we don't get invited to that party anymore. And in fact, we'll just be blamed for our own type of COVID hysteria. Like there's no situation where we're prepared for when they just start parroting our points and leave us just with the negative shit. And my fear is that somehow this gay mania all this shit will be blamed on the right. I'm not exactly sure how, but it seems to keep happening with other things. Now, what do you think about that?
I think that's an interesting thesis. I think you're for an example to that with the COVID stuff. We see like kind of liberals buying into that. Even like the mainstream media, like the mouthpiece of the regime is openly acknowledging that it probably was a lab leak. Something that would have gotten you banned off YouTube and all social media like 2 or 3 years ago, essentially. And we see how well they are co-opting the right's narratives when they're found to be overwhelmingly correct when it suits them, right? I think you are correct. The right will not be ready when its ideas are accepted because, again, the right, and I like to use this metaphor all that time, is basically an abused spouse that constantly gets beat up by its husband and then comes crawling back to them and like doesn't actually want to fight back. It doesn't even conceptualize how to fight back because it's never been in the position of domination for like so long at this stage in the game. So I think that's interesting. I'm not sure if at this stage I hope will we pass that kind of stuff and like able to take advantage of these narratives, but I'm not sure. Maybe there is some credence, kind of your theory there.
There's a couple of things to bring up. I'll give people an example of that occurred on the right, just within this space, and that was the conflict between Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk. So everyone remembers the rise of the Groypers. Everyone knows that kind of emerged when they started calling out Charlie Kirk on stage for being just a establishment conservative who won't talk about Zionism, that won't talk about the Great Replacement, all that shit, right? And we all made fun of him for that. Then one day, Charlie Kirk just starts talking about that. So all of a sudden, Charlie Kirk is the Great Replacement guy and the anti-Zionism guy. And what now? What now? He just agreed with it. And now he's saying it. And now that's a thing you don't really get to claim is your own. And what's interesting, and I'm not trying to blame the Groypers for anything, but I think it's something that affects us all. It's that I don't even think most of us are convinced that what we're saying is correct. Like we might be saying it because we think it's radical, but it's never dawned on us that one day the soccer moms or the teachers or the normies, whatever you want to call them, would actually just start believing us. Almost like we're in love with the idea of being a dissident. We don't want to be mainstream. We never prepared for that eventuality. And I think we can probably start doing that. You're seeing conversations happen right now that you would have never fucking dreamed of 5 years ago. Okay, what now? Are we trying to bring more people in our spaces? Are we trying to normalize our points? Are we trying to put a good face on them? Or are we running to further extremes? And that's, not to say everyone's doing that, but I would like more people to ask, like, what would you actually do if people just started agreeing with us one day? Like, what's planned? What's the next thing? What's the next thing,
Yeah, that's kind of where you run into this big problem on the right is they have no like vision for the future of like how to actually govern when we win, right? We like to make memes and talk about based future, right? Where we own the libtards and put them in prison, right, for their gay ideas. But anytime a serious conversation or someone tries to conceptualize a vision of the future, you get every single faction fighting over what that future looks like, and nothing serious is actually achieved. And this has been a problem since probably before I was even born, but like I feel like this was really evident in like alt-right 1.0 when that like kind of fell apart and like we all like splinterized into these different factions and then kind of coalesced again within RX, and then that kind of fell apart with kind of the more rise of like the AA elitist kind of sphere. And like I feel like people are trying to solve this question, but at the same time, like not enough people are thinking about it. That's
we also I hear a lot of people say like, oh, what we need in this, because what we know is the dissident right is a pretty varied milieu of beliefs and stuff. Like there's still NRX in there, there's monarchists in there, there's Wignats, like there's all different types of guys that don't really get along. But what was interesting about the alt-right, I don't believe like the Richard Spencer revisionist history that he was just responsible for everything. He would like it if that were the case. Well, if it was so easy, they should fucking do it again, Rich. Is that what you're doing right now? Is this what fucking winning looks like, motherfucker? Anyway, the whole thing was that we didn't have a lot in common, but we actually had a common momentum or a common enemy or a common goal. And it's easier to coalesce people and get them to move in one direction if you've got a definite goal. And that's what Trump was. A lot of alt-right 1.0 really was about Trump and what Trump represented. And a lot of people like to practice revisionist history and act like Trump wasn't a big deal. Like if you were my age, Trump was like the coolest thing ever because Trump wasn't supposed to happen. Like when I went, I'm Canadian, right? Like what the fuck do I know? I'm not voting, right? But when I went to bed before Trump was elected, I was convinced he wouldn't win. I was convinced, like, oh, something's going to happen. Like, this is a cool thing that's happening. He's not going to be president. Then he was. And there was this feeling like we're in a different room now. That wasn't supposed to happen. That means anything's possible. But that goal was achieved. And there's this interesting book that we covered recently called Experiences in Groups by Wilfred Bion, which is he's a psychologist, and his specialty was group psychology. Because there's this idea in psychology that it's supposed to be one-on-one, but most people don't experience life as one-on-one. They experience life as a group, right? So he differentiated between two types of groups that he found in his studies of groups and group dynamics and what group dynamics emerge in closed settings and whatnot. And one was called a basic assumption group, which is like a group that forms based on just a desire for an identity or a desire for a group. And these are the ones where you get into like cults of personality and weird ideologies. But he differentiated that between that and what's called a work group. And a work group was just like a group that had a mission or a goal or a purpose. And he found that no matter what the identities were, no matter what they believed, as long as they had like a common purpose, they could make all their what he called basic assumptions. So basic assumptions would be emotional drives. That would be like, all the things that kind of drive groups apart. But he said, as long as they're unified in one direction, they can make all that other shit subservient to the mission. And I think that's what you saw what you see in a lot of these revolutions and whatnot, because most revolutions are groups that don't even agree with each other. That's the American Revolution. The American Revolution was a lot of groups that didn't really see eye to eye, but they kind of had this one momentum and one goal over time. And so you can capture a momentum or cause a momentum, but that momentum never lasts. That momentum is supposed to end eventually when the mission ends, when the goal is achieved. And a lot of us were looking like, what happened to the alt-right? Well, it got its thing. The thing was accomplished, and then it's kind of supposed to die, or you find a new mission after that, and we just didn't have a second mission. So a lot of us are kind of we're grouped up over kind of raising awareness about certain topics. We want to red pill people. We want to raise awareness on our issue and get people talking about it, and then they do, and we don't have a second mission from that. And not saying that that's not because we're stupid, that's not because we're disorganized. That's everyone, that's every group. But I think we need to start thinking, if we can, multiple groups ahead. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. Instead of thinking in these more like short-term collectivist goals, thinking about kind of the long-term like vision, right, of the future, and like the society that we want to actualize in reality, not the meme version that we constantly post on Twitter and like Telegram group chats, right?
Yeah, everyone wants the
hell.
perfect schematic. They want the schematic of the stasis that we want to live in forever. But all we really are capable of achieving is momentum. That's all we've ever been capable of achieving. Every revolution is just momentum. And I think we need to find a new mission, something that this whole thing can be unified in one direction. We just need some kind of goal, but then also keep in mind that that's not going to be the schematic. That's not going to be the everlasting peace. Even when the Bolshevik revolution occurred, like there was a hard stop on that, and then it became another thing. And there's this interesting, I keep just talking about books, but there's this book called The Square and the Tower, written by Niall Ferguson. That's about secret societies and how secret societies tend to trigger these intellectual movements, and these intellectual movements trigger revolutions. He made a point in one of his interviews where he was saying that it's a fascinating event that we don't really understand, how the Bolshevik Revolution toppled the ancien regime, and then almost immediately became a bureaucratic state with its established leaders. Like that's kind of rare. That implies that there was a group formation that was happening in the background beneath the surface that we didn't really understand yet. Same thing with the Third Reich. Same thing with a lot of the more successful revolutions you see. And like you can study stuff like the Bolshevik Revolution and the Third Reich to get a more modern view of it.
Or I think actually what are more pertinent examples that actually help us, like the Spanish kind of
Oh
Civil
yeah,
War,
yeah.
right? Or like the Mussolini's rise to power, which are more like practical and like successful, I think. Even though they eventually lost power, but Franco was more successful in his endeavors. That's a more successful model of seeing how this works. Because at least they presented a vision for governance that could actually last, right? Both of those like revolutionary states, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, eventually failed for one reason or another. We could debate about those reasons all day long, but ultimately they were going to end at some point, right? With the burning out of like that kind of revolutionary spark, eventually is going to seep out. But getting back to some more like fun topics, you're a Leaf, like I'm an American, so basically every single American's conceptualization of Canada spiritually is like a nice guy who goes to Tim Hortons and like says, "Hey, how you doing?" That's is that true? Like, where does this nice guy personality like come from? Like, I've never understood where it's come from.
Well, here's the funny thing that you would probably piss a lot of Quebecois people off with that because there's certain areas, like we said, that would see themselves as distinct. Maybe some Albertans don't agree with that, but they would be aware of what you mean. And that's my lived reality. The Tim Hortons thing is true. I don't really like Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons I work in marketing. I had Tim Hortons as a client once. They're a really interesting organization, but a lot of Canadians, especially liberals, are grasping for a national identity, and they don't have a lot of stuff to grasp. So it'll be stuff like Tim Hortons. It'll be hockey. It'll be what else? Drake wants to be that, but he's not gonna, and he's been rejected. It's not going to be Drake alongside hockey as much as he wants it to be. The niceness, there's at least in Anglo Canada, there's a rich, and I should have mentioned this earlier, there's a rich tradition of British culture and Anglo culture that I think if we were to craft a new Canadian identity, you would have to account for that. But I think there's a lot of, it might seem like politeness from a distance. I see it more as passive aggressiveness, because here's the thing: when I was growing up, I don't know if this is the case now, so Zoomers can maybe correct me, but when I was growing up here in Ontario, there was this overwhelming sense that we were just better than Americans. We were more enlightened. We were certainly more progressive, but we were just smarter, more evolved than Americans. But then every American I met was really cool. And I met lots of different Americans. I met from New York. I met a Texan with a big cowboy hat, and he was the coolest, nicest guy I ever met. I said, that's interesting. I was told, you're raised, it's like the Daily Show idea of what Americans are like, as these loud, boorish, violent people. And then even if you found the people who are supposed to be the most violent, they end up being nicer. And the guys that that are supposed to be the most evolved are actually very passive aggressive. They're very pretentious for no fucking reason. Just like the nerds we were talking about earlier. They're not any smarter. They're just like more bitter. And there's so many Canadians that would define themselves as oppositional to America for no good reason, because we're not that different. Not really. Like, we came from the same place generally. But we keep picking these minutia to separate us. And I always thought that was silly. But in terms of being polite, kind of, I think it's more passive aggressiveness. Tim Hortons, yes, everyone loves Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons, I'm growing to like it. I used to hate Tim Hortons coffee, but every coffee kind of got worse. Like, Starbucks used to be good coffee. Now Starbucks is dog shit. And I think Tim Hortons got better. So I don't know if every mainstream coffee shop got worse to meet Tim Hortons, or Tim Hortons got better. But I tried it recently and it wasn't bad. But yeah, more or less true. But yeah, I don't know if that's the case anymore, though. Maybe young people are different because the internet might have changed everything, right?
I mean, from my point of view, that's always been the stereotype. Probably because I'll say this again: Americans don't know geography at all, and it would astonish you. Most Americans don't even know the state they live in at all. They don't even know what their capital is. Most of them. So they probably couldn't even point out Canada on a map. A good chunk of them, a shocking amount of them, if you ask them where
I don't want you to be
where.
hard on yourself. I'm going to interrupt you in a very aggressive way right now because the Canadians will say that all the time. I knew that growing up, like, oh, they can't even point out our capital on a map. I'm like, okay, what's the capital of the U.S.? And don't fucking say New York, you dumbass. Like most Canadians aren't like cartographers like they want to pretend like, oh dude, and I've met more Americans that knew more about Canada than we were taught about America. And I met people from Alabama who in high school geography learned the provinces. I wasn't taught shit about America in elementary school or high school, and that's a fact. So, that's just one stereotype I want to get rid of. And I think that goes with that hostility I was talking about.
Okay, maybe it's mirrored then across both our states. I don't know because we have that similar like Anglo stock background, which is why
It's funny. Like we learned more about British history in school. Like we learned about the Boer War and stuff like that. We learned about like South African history.
That's funny. I think we learn about Canadian history a little bit, but not a lot. Learn more about European history, at least in my high school. But again, American education is absolute crap. So whatever that's worth.
I wasn't the best. Believe it or not, I wasn't the best student in high school either. So
Well, you weren't the next like coming of like Alex Jones in high school, who was already like writing a book about the globalist ruling class controlling Canada.
I went to public school, so all afternoon was "Don't get pregnant" class, and then it was cool because our high school was in sort of like a steel town, and so if you wanted to, you could take auto shop, so you could actually have a class where you learn how to be a mechanic in high school. I always thought that was cool. I didn't do it though. I wanted to get into computers because I'm a fucking asshole, and if I just went down that road, who knows where I would be.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, we really do. I would say this is the case, especially in America. Those like the more local opportunities just like evaporated, especially at the turn of the 20th century. Quite frankly, all those opportunities in like schools with like some of those more like localized industries that you kind of mentioned there are just like gone. And so
Yeah,
like
let
basically
me. I was saying, let me clarify for people. I don't want to be like a successful comedic. I want to be a laid off union guy. Sorry, continue.
No, yeah, that's the dream, the Anglo dream. This is why it's only a white people. Unions are a white people phenomenon. Unions would not exist without white people. This is fundamental to white people. Like this way of organizing with labor, but that's a tangent aside.
Well, just as to add on to that, I'm thinking about going back and watching The Irishman with De Niro and Pacino and all that. I want to give that movie another shot. But one thing they pointed out in the movie and around the movie was like, no one talks about Jimmy Hoffa right now anymore. And Jimmy Hoffa, I guess he had to be alive at the time, but Jimmy Hoffa was like the biggest name. Like there was almost no one bigger than Jimmy Hoffa. And it's just fascinating that his identity was so tied to that union, to the people, to the workers. And then I don't know, it just seems like our inability to even mentally grasp that era means that whole like the union as a reliable function of society is gone. Like maybe it died with him.
Well, I feel like unions kind of served the place with the turn of the 19th century with like industrialization, right? Because it kind of made sense, right, with the rise of the capitalist class that you kind of would need like leverage bargaining power, right? Especially with like, I'm a fan of industry. I like industry. I'm American. I love industry. I cherish our ancient, kind of mid-century like industrialization. I think it's a great aesthetic, and it provided a lot of people a good source of living, right? However, at the same time, like conditions in the factories and kind of like the suburbs and the cities that surrounded them were kind of crap.
Hey, you mentioned there that a union is like a white guy thing, and I agree. But can you imagine an Indian union?
You can't conceptualize that though. This is the thing. You can't. It's not even a conceptualized thing.
Just,
Maybe it's for.
and what if just imagine an Indian union?
I literally can't. I literally can't.
Oh fuck.
Fuck, that's a
People
funny one though.
that's what we call an IKEA bit. Everyone, all the listeners, you got to build that one yourself, but you can build it at home easy.
Well, I'm sure we'll see it happen. I mean, you guys like are important in so many of them that like you're gonna become a province of India by the year 2040.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it'd be important because they don't unionize because they can't conceptualize things at that level. They like their social organization kind of hits the ceiling of castes, and they can't really break outside of that. They can't really absorb other ideologies or social orientations. So like they're a perfect, lower caste, essentially. That's why they like them.
They're the perfect like underclass for the globalist system is Indians, which is why they kind of promote like Vivek, right? It's and they're promoting them a lot across the Western sphere. You got Rishi Sunak in like England, right? And you got that like I forgot what his name like Khan in like Scotland, who literally
Yep.
says that like we need to make Scotland less white and like less
Yeah.
Scottish.
See, I'm going to try and say this in a way that doesn't get you in trouble on YouTube, but a lot of white guys are very competent at dealing with the disorganization of black people or, Hispanics. They're not ready to grapple with the organizational capabilities of Indians because Indians aren't borderline retarded. They're just, and I've worked my entire career around Indians, and there's this really great tweet. I forget who made it, but they were saying like the viewer of these elections are getting a front row seat to what every hiring manager and HR department went through over the past 10 years. That you got like a really well-spoken, cool Indian guy that says all the right stuff, and no one will kiss your ass harder than an Indian guy. Like I've seen this happen. Like companies run by like white guys, they love hiring Indians because they work harder and they look up to you as if you're a slave master. That's the best way I can describe it. Like they will make themselves into slaves, and as a white guy, you're thinking, "Cool, I've always wanted to do this, and I can do it legally." You bet. But then eventually you look away, then look back a year later, and everyone it's Sanpreets and Rajendahars. And something happened. You looked away, and they were crafty and competent enough to staff the entire organization with their friends and oftentimes people from their specific caste. And they have a social organization that you are not familiar with. You don't understand this. And like the average white guy isn't ready to like untangle the fucking mess that is like Indian identities and how they can unify in ways that, and they're smart enough to lie. They can be subversive. They know like, but I don't want to get up on too many anecdotes here, but I'm like, it's amazing. Indian women, especially, it's like they have this ability to sound very intellectual. They say yes to everything. You'll never hear an Indian employee say no to a request, but they just never do it. Like anyone who's hired Indians will know this, like that they'll nod and act like, and they're the most attentive people in the world. And then they just fuck up constantly. And it's weird because they look like people who shouldn't fuck up, but then they do. And like the fucking app you're designing is full of fucking cockroaches. Like, how the fuck did this happen? But that's what you're going to experience on a civilizational level, and it's so much worse than you're going to imagine. I know this is probably the part that's going to get in trouble the most, but I've dealt with this on a one-to-one basis, and this isn't some shit I read on some forum somewhere. And anyone who's worked in engineering, anyone who's worked in the startup sector, anyone who's been in Silicon Valley, you know exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. And why is it they always end up CEOs? Why does everyone have an Indian CEO and they're all shit for brains? That's fucking crazy, isn't it?
It is when you start noticing patterns. Pattersing noticing, right? I feel like this is especially exemplified in Canada because, like, that's like one of the big ethnic like immigration groups that the government is using as like a bludgeon against like white Canadians, right? In America, it's a bit different because it's like basically the entire world comes here across our southern border. So like one day it's Chinese, one day it's Vietnamese, one day it's like Romanians. So like you get a mix of everywhere. But Canada, it's like it's just Chinamen and Indians. It's
It's
just
mostly
those two
China,
groups.
and it really is. There's not a lot of black people in Canada. If there are, it's majority Caribbeans. There's a lot of Caribbeans in Canada. And on the East Coast, there's sort of this legacy of escaped American slaves. So there's a lot of black people on the East Coast, but in Ontario and elsewhere, you'll see a lot of Caribbeans. Not entirely sure why, but we just do. But even then, it's very, very low. The rest is Indians and Chinese, and they are unified and competent enough to set up their own ethnic enclaves and set up their own parallel societies, which is, so what they got going on is separate from, like, they're doing stuff that you're not even paying attention to. They will dominate entire cities before you know it, and they got their own banks. They openly hire their own people, and it's just a nation within a nation. And that's when people say, like, oh, Canada's kind of over. It's like, yeah, the people are openly colonizing this country and no one really gives a shit. And they're just now starting to be open about their hostility towards what we might call the natives, but you could say white culture generally. Like it's like these Indian guys, these based Indians, like they're not your fucking friends. Who's the guy, Ramaswamy in
Yeah,
America?
Vivek, yeah.
Like you don't fucking fall for it, guy. Like, I know you're not going to fall for it. I know no one's going to fall for it, but you're going to see people fall for this, and it's going to be the scariest thing you've ever seen.
No, it's the boomer cons. My boomer con grandmother likes Vivek. Like this is his thing, especially among the older, like in the less like intellectually inclined people.
He's playing a game that they're not ready for. They don't understand Indian culture. They don't understand. Like I saw this interesting tweet. It was by an Indian guy. I think it might have been on LinkedIn or some shit. If you want to get the finger on the pulse of what Indians are doing, go on LinkedIn, by the way. But he was saying that, yeah, this Ramaswamy guy, he claims to be from this caste, but I live in India and I know that caste, and that last name isn't from that caste. It turns out he's not from that caste. He's from a different caste. So he's got this whole like shell game he's playing right now with the identity. Like he's lying to people. And I don't know why he's lying. But the fact that he is lying and the other Indians are calling him out in ways that we wouldn't be able to, that concerns me. There's a lie happening, but I don't understand why they're lying, and that should be highly concerning to people. And he's going to say all the right stuff. He's giving you white replacement. The guy who's replacing you is granting you white replacement, and everyone's cheering. I'm like, I don't know, man. Just stop for a second. We need to figure this out. We need to figure out what the fuck is going on here, because this might be the worst thing that's ever happened if he gets to where I think he might be, unless Trump fucking wins, or anyway, unless Trump wins and elects him as his running mate, which he'd probably fucking do.
Knowing Trump, it probably would be worse than Vivek, but I don't know at this stage in the game. But I think you're right, honestly. Like immigration is already a problem enough. However, like I feel like it's less of a threat from just the third world, just because of innate characteristics that I'm not going to go into on my channel. However, when they import like competent minorities, it's even worse of a threat to us, because they actually know how to like be perfect middle managers, and like take advantage of the system, right, that the bureaucrats operate, and again, it's the positions of power.
It's funny. You triggered a thought in me. I'm sorry. I keep interrupting you. I apologize. But there was this narrative that was circulating in Canada that a lot of immigrants were self-deporting, especially Indians, because they get here and they find out it's not what they thought it would be. It's like Paris syndrome. It's too cold. It's too expensive. They can't afford to eat, and they want to go. And we're all cheering, yay! And I'm over here saying, well, hold on. You're saying that this is a country a fucking third worlder doesn't want to live in? We have problems here right now. We have problems if poor people are saying, this is not for me. I'm going to go live in the pile of shit. That's a problem. We got some stuff to fix over here.
And I think that's a great last statement to leave this conversation off. I greatly enjoyed it. I'm going to leave the conversation off with that statement. I think there's nothing more perfect. But with that being said, Dimes, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope to have you back on. I really appreciate everyone who's joined me in the audience to watch this conversation. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel, helps out tremendously in sports careers like me. Remember, you got to support your allies. Again, we're a tiny minority engaged in a tremendous force, so you got to support your allies when you can. And with that being said, everyone, remember, we're going to win this fight. Victory is inevitable. Keep your hopes up, and have a good rest of your night.